Caroline Whitman, a successful author married to Mark, discovers late-night evidence he is hiding something about her and their finances. She uncovers secret messages and withdrawals, engages her estate attorney friend Anna, and moves her assets into a trust. Mark retaliates with a public smear campaign and a lawsuit, including a fraudulent co-plaintiff connected to the earlier text. Caroline and Anna marshal forensic proof. In court, the fraud is exposed. Mark loses and is ordered to pay fees. Caroline walks away, scarred but empowered, reclaiming control of her life and advising others to protect themselves. The city breathed a thin winter fog through the brownstone's mullioned windows. Caroline Whitman kept a mug warm between cupped hands and read the paragraph again, tasting the sound of a sentence she'd put in the world. The book had come out 2 years earlier and still felt like a small, private triumph. Beside her, Mark's slippers whispered on hardwood and the apartment filled with the ordinary choreography of 2 lives, his newspaper, her pen, the silent negotiation of where the dog bed would go next. Mark's voice was the easiest weather, steady, flattering, built to calm. He said Caroline like a held note, an accent of private devotion. That night, the words sounded the same, but later, in the hallway, it bent into something else. She'd woken to a sound that wasn't his breath. A low conversation threaded through the house like a cable, precise and mechanical. Caroline pressed her palm to the mattress, counted her pulse. The voice from his office was not lover's hush. It had edges. "She still doesn't suspect anything," he said, and the syllables landed like small stones. "Almost done." The world narrowed to the sliver of light beneath the office door. Caroline's hand found the frame, fingers leaving a faint ridge. For a long second she thought to confront him, slam the door, demand truth, but the voice moved her differently. It made her invisible. She folded back into the bed, let the sheets shape her body as a lie, and kept still. Morning brought ordinary betrayals. The coffee marked just the way, and the way his hand found hers as he kissed her forehead. When Mark left that day, his tie still crooked as if from sleep, he carried the calm of a practiced actor. Caroline stayed behind, a quiet animal, and opened the banking app. Numbers unfolded like a map she had never been taught to read. Small withdrawals, recurring transfers whose pattern hid in plain sight. Nothing to trigger alarms to anyone else. A $500 withdrawal here, $2,000 there, until they were, together, a geography of intent. Her throat tightened. The image of a steady life came undone into 100 small inconsistencies. She called Anna because urgency needed authority. Anna picked up on the second ring, crisp voice, no small talk, as if law sat like a uniform that made her braver. "Move assets," she said without preface. "We put a trust in your name." The sentence had the soft finality of a safety net. That evening Mark left his phone on the table for the first time in months. Caroline stared at it until the apartment felt foreign. She could have left it untouched. She did not. The screen pulsed her permission like a careless god. Inside the messages, one thread sat like a keyed tooth, a number with no name, a terse instruction: send her the Ilium files. Make sure she stays in the dark. The phrase held no context, only brittle intent. Caroline's hands trembled enough to close the phone and lay it face down as if the device might breathe fire. She dressed for a walk with the practiced calm of someone walking into a storm. The city did not speak of betrayal. It offered small, indifferent truths: delivery bikes, the echo of a subway, a woman with a stroller cursing at a cab. Caroline moved through the crowd like an apparatus recalibrating. She felt present in a way she rarely did, every step a proof that her feet could choose direction. At dinner Mark smiled in the dim light and kissed her forehead as always. For the first time the gesture felt like a practice stroke in a play she was no longer willing to perform. She let him keep his illusion that night. She would not, she decided, let him keep hers. Anna's office smelled of lemon oil and old leather files. The windows framed the towers across the river with flat, indifferent light. Caroline watched Anna move, fast, mechanical, like a surgeon discovering a new form of anatomy, and felt the small, unfamiliar luxury of being defended. "We don't announce anything yet," Anna said, folding a sheaf of papers with the smoothness of someone who handled chaos daily. "We act." There was urgency in the sentence that carried no spectacle. They moved at once, account holds, a trust, reassigning titles. Each legal instrument was its own ritual, handwritten signatures, the gravity of stamps, a notary's solemn nod. Caroline watched as her life altered shape under the precise choreography of procedure. But the practical safety net carried emotional friction she had not expected. Where once she had been content to live in the hush of Mark's decisions, each transaction now read as a betrayal. The rawness of that discovery was less cinematic than cumulative, 100 small betrayals adding up to a landscape she could no longer recognize. She found herself watching him in the light of detail, how his hand lingered on the edge of the sink, how he went outside to take calls, the way his face softened into practiced ease when she entered a room. When Mark handed her divorce papers at the table, it felt theatrical, clean folder, calm voice, the casual cruelty of a man delivering verdicts with the same practiced hands that once made morning coffee. He slid the folder as if it were another document in his ledger. "I don't want things to be painful," he said, and the sentence landed with a stranger's pity. Caroline's answer was quiet and controlled. "You should know I move things." She watched his expression change from cool assurance to a slow, dawning panic. For a moment, the man who had been her husband looked destabilized, an unexpected pleasure, but not a triumph. The law had closed a gate, but the other valves of humiliation were opening. At the office, whispers arrived faster than she expected. A screenshot, a smear forum post publicizing a rumor about embezzlement, anonymous, targeted, poisonous. The attack changed the battleground. This was no longer domestic property alone. It reached into her professional credit, the careful architecture of reputation she'd built for years. Rachel, her assistant, came in pale and apologetic, the tiny courier of bad news. "I think someone posted about you on a forum," she said, voice small. Caroline felt the old steady calm fracture. It wasn't just money anymore, it was the currency of trust she'd earned with readers, editors, colleagues. Anna moved from legal mechanics to narrative control, drafting cease and desists, preparing statements that would function as shields. Mark escalated next like a methodical chess player. He filed a lawsuit, a claim wrapped in the technical language of fraud. He brought in a co-plaintiff, an obscure name Caroline had seen once in a message thread, now writ large in a legal document. The claim's architecture felt designed to suggest a pattern rather than prove one. Caroline's lawyers read it like a draft of a play needing actors. The atmosphere thickened into a waiting game. On the outside, Caroline retained her public posture, author, hostess, the woman who smiled on panels. Inside, her nights rearranged themselves into lit windows and late emails, forensic accountants laying lines between dates, signatures, metadata. Experts traced file origins, timestamps, IP logs. Each discovery was a small elegy and a small vindication. Caroline found, too, that resolve had a different temperament than rage. There were days when the anger made her reckless and others when it made her practical. When it made her laugh, unexpected, mean and quick, it felt like reclaiming control. She remembered, during one long evening in Anna's office lit by a single lamp, the first time she'd signed a book contract in her 20s. The joy then had been the ownership of words. Now she had to own her life in the same way. Outside, the city moved uncaringly on. Inside, the legal apparatus clicked along its own, patient machinery, trust instruments, affidavits, subpoenas, each sound a counterpoint to a life being rewoven. The midweek morning when the smear surged felt like a physical pressure, the kind you notice in your ears before a storm. Caroline opened her editor's email with trembling fingers and found the forwarded link that tore the room's air, a thread with her name pinned beneath speculation about embezzlement, anonymous posters threading imagined motives into half-truths. The comments were cruelly specific. One even mentioned the Ilya name. Someone had fed them a story with the cadence of an inside source. Anna's joy tightened. "They want you to panic," she said, cold as steel. "They want you to pay with reputation, time, energy." Her voice had no sympathy for theatrics. It had, instead, an appetite for dismantling lies. But the twist came when one of Anna's investigators traced a set of documents not to an accounting system, but to a template library used by a small private firm. The metadata revealed a detail: an IP ping from a cafe across the harbor logged on a night Mark claimed to be home. The forgery, for all its audacity, had left fingerprints. And those fingerprints pointed not only to Ilya, the shadowy co-plaintiff, but to a pattern of opportunistic fraud that suited someone with both motive and means. Caroline sat in on the forensic review, the room dim except for the glow of a monitor. The analyst clicked through a sequence of rewritten ledgers, altered dates, and manufactured authorizations. Signatures were traced and compared under magnification. Micro differences revealed the human tremor of a forger. Where one would expect clean, machine-generated continuity, there were the awkward manual edits of a hurried conspirator, one who wanted an illusion of legitimacy more than the reality. The shock of recognition wasn't romantic. It was strategic. The IP trails intersected with an account that had, months earlier, received generous wire transfers from an offshore account connected to a shell company Mark had used for corporate expense accounts. The architecture of Mark's life, expense accounts, shell entities, plausible deniability, fell into a pattern when viewed through the lens of forensic detail. Confrontation came like the click of a hinge. Caroline invited Mark to dinner under the pretense of reconciliation. The city's light haloed him across the table. He wore the practiced complacency of someone used to believing his stagecraft would never be discovered. Caroline laid the evidence before him, not theatrically, but with the precise calm of someone reading aloud from a ledger: dates, transfers, and IP trace. His smile thinned. "You don't understand how complicated this is," he said, voice attempting a paternal patience. She didn't want to hear complexity. She wanted truth. "Then explain it to me," she said. He faltered, the first real flinch since the first night she'd heard that voice. There's a moment in every reveal when the accused chooses. Denial can be a tactic, an attempt to rewrite the narrative. Admission can come with an appeal to pity. Mark did something subtler and more dangerous. He attempted to weaponize ambiguity, offering half-truths and shifting blame to the freelance forger, to the culture of corporate mismanagement, to the ease with which documents can be mimicked. That evening, Caroline realized the case was no longer merely about law. It was about narrative dominance. Mark had staged a believable fiction meant to land in the public imagination. If she wanted to win, she would have to out-narrate him with evidence and with form. Anna pivoted. Timelines would become press packets. The forensics would be distilled into simple, undeniable moments that could be spoken plainly in court and press. There was also a private, unexpected twist embedded in the documents: a small wire transfer, months before, to a college friend of Mark's, a figure whose financial life had never previously intersected with theirs. The investigator raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes these strings run to old debts," he said. The implication was prophetic. Human networks make a neat net for truth. The midpoint had shifted into a chase, less a single reveal than the discovery that a larger architecture connected the intimate betrayals to wider material transactions. Caroline left that night with the evidence tucked into a folder under her arm, and a feeling she hadn't expected: not cathartic triumph, but gravity. The battle had turned public. The stakes that had once been private were now threaded through the public ledger of reputation, and the city outside seemed suddenly to hum with possibility and danger in equal measure. As the calendar moved toward the hearing, every day felt like a careful rehearsal for the same scene: Caroline in navy, Anna at her side, a courtroom that would witness both the mechanics of law and the theater of character. The legal team turned their forensics into a narrative, translating timestamps into a story with a beginning, middle, and incontrovertible end. Each piece of evidence became a beat in a script designed to strip away illusion. Mark pushed back with performative indignation. He appeared in public with a clipped statement about partnership and fairness. Behind closed doors, he tried to rally sympathetic voices: colleagues who benefited from shared investments, a distant cousin who testified to his temperament. But the smear campaign had already overreached, its reach thinned when called on detail. Caroline's world condensed into ritual, interviews with experts, sworn depositions, and the mundane cruelty of calendar appointments. Her assistant Rachel sat across from her one night, 2 coffees between them, and offered something like apology and something like resolve. People are starting to ask questions, Rachel said. But they're still you. The sentence landed soft but meaningful. Reputation fractures slowest in the places where people already know you. There were private bruises that never made court transcripts. Caroline woke to find a photograph from years earlier, dredged up and sent anonymously to an editor with a malicious caption. A contributor at a magazine withdrew an invitation to a roundtable the same week. The social world, agents, colleagues, readers, began, subtly, to reroute. Each small loss was its own notch in the hourglass. In response, Anna pushed for clarity. "We don't chase revenge," she told Caroline. "We show the truth." The court is where facts are forced to speak in order. She worked with the forensic team to isolate the most incontrovertible elements, the forged signatures whose ink lines didn't match historical samples, server logs that showed document creation long before any supposed transaction, and a curious absence: the co-plaintiff Ilya's failure to appear in any verifiable business registry. Mark's tactic was to complicate. He would bury the simple truth beneath a thicket of plausible deniability. Caroline learned to expect obfuscation and to prepare evidence that resisted it. Each witness deposition became a small crucible. Each expert's testimony had to be airtight. The team rehearsed cross-examination like actors rehearsing a monologue. 2 days before the hearing, an unexpected development sharpened the air. A reporter reached out with a soft question: would Caroline speak publicly? She could have declined. Instead, she wrote a short statement that felt like a distillation of the years she had spent writing, a refusal to be defined by rumor, an insistence on the right to a fair process. Anna cleared the language. They released it in coordination with newly compiled forensic reports. Courtrooms are strange places where personalities are distilled into gestures, folded hands, a cough, the sound of a pen sliding. As the day arrived, Caroline felt the curious mixture of exhaustion and focus that precedes moments of truth. She listened as other cases were called. She felt the weight of small human dramas press against her. Mark sat across the room, hands folded, his face practiced into that same neutral mask. When her case was called, Anna stood first and organized the narrative, a concise timeline, the forensic methodologies, and the clear forensic anomalies. Caroline watched the judge read, the jury, or rather the room, lean in as the evidence moved from abstract to tangible. Each document was placed into the record as if into a spotlight. The story Anna had crafted had clarity and discipline. It and Caroline would have to stand when the smoke cleared. The courtroom held its breath as Anna walked the judge through the sequence, timestamp by timestamp, signature by signature, until the forgeries felt less like a paper trick and more like a map of intent. Anna's voice was precise, without flourish. Evidence does its own showmanship. The forensic accountant took the stand and, with the cool language of numbers, explained how the copies were manufactured, where the discrepancies lived, and how an IP trace anchored the fabrication to a set of devices connected with Mark's corporate accounts. Mark's lawyer tried to obscure the moment with procedural objections and rhetorical flourishes, but the expert's testimony had a crystalline clarity. The court record showed server logs that contradicted Mark's timeline, sapped the rhythm from his denials, and revealed a careful choreography of transfers timed to appear routine while funneling contingency funds away from scrutiny. Then the crucial empty chair, that of the co-plaintiff Ilya, loomed in the gallery. Anna had requested subpoenaed records that proved Ilya's supposed firm did not operate on the dates listed, and that the signature samples attributed to Ilya were modern forgeries. The judge questioned why such an entity would be stitched into a suit bearing so many holes. The moment felt, in its legal modesty, like the unraveling of a magician's hand. Mark's face tightened. The first honest expression since everything began, fear flickered and then hardened into anger. "You're manufacturing a narrative," he snapped when his turn to speak came. His voice lacked cadence, without control. He attempted to tie Caroline's asset transfers to opportunistic theft. He suggested motive without evidence, a tired gambit, her action as criminality rather than preservation. Anna stood and met that gambit like a counterpoint. She explained, calmly, why the trust line and the timing were not only legal but prudent, temporary asset protection in the face of a disclosed conspiracy. She contrasted Caroline's public record, decades of income, sales, contracts, with the ephemeral script Mark had staged. The legal theater closed into a different register when the forensic team presented the IP link, an address resolution that traced edits to a machine used for corporate bookkeeping and, by extension, traced a chain that connected through intermediaries back to Mark's account. The evidence did not scream, it threaded. Jurors and judge alike follow thread until the fabric gives. Finally, the judge's voice read the decision: dismissal of claims, orders to cover legal fees, a curt note about the absence of credible evidence tying Caroline to the alleged fraud. In the moment the gavel's echo seemed like something that could alter gravity. Caroline felt neither triumphant laughter nor cinematic vindication. Relief came like the soft, long exhale after a suspended breath. The room allowed itself a measured easing. Mark rose, face ashen with a private fury, and said nothing more than the brittle vow of someone who sees the world collapse. As he exited, his shoulders bent with the weight of his defeat, legal and maybe deeper. He looked like a man whose armor had been found hollow. Outside the courthouse, cameras blinked and fans of gossip sharpened their questions. Caroline walked past them with Anna at her elbow, two women who'd made the machinery of truth work. Reporters circled, but the moment had shifted for her. Victory wasn't a headline so much as the return of the quiet right to continue, unmolested. She did not feel victorious in the way the tabloids would frame it. Instead, she felt unburdened, an unfamiliar lightness. The cost had been real: weeks of sleep lost, shoulders tighter, a professional chill that would fade only with time. But the core remained. She'd refused to be gaslit into silence and had taken tangible steps to preserve her autonomy. Weeks folded into a softer rhythm after the verdict. The press cycle spent and the worst headlines receding like a tide, Caroline found that the city's ordinary textures returned to her senses: the smell of paper in the library, the rhythm of trains across the river, the small microphone of winter air at dawn. She walked more deliberately now, feeling the ground as if relearning it. She returned to the draft of a new essay she had started before the chaos, an attempt to write about small betrayals and the architecture of trust. Words arrived haltingly at first, then with a pressure that felt like reclaiming a part of herself. Where once her sentences trimmed to please, now they carried an edge of reckoning. The bookshop readings resumed, tentatively. Readers came, not as curiosities, but as witnesses to a voice that had been tested. The legal victory did not erase every scar. Invitations remained polite and cautious. A former friend's warmth felt thin, others reached out with generative kindness. Rachel stayed on, steady and discreet, the assistant who'd become a small, quiet anchor. Anna, sharp, efficient, unforgiving when necessary, became more than a lawyer. She became a friend who understood how to build a life's defenses without turning them into armor. Caroline learned small, specific lessons about contingency. She kept copies of contracts. She understood the forensic language that had once been alien to her, and she made sure to view money as a tool requiring guardrails. She practiced a practical sovereignty: appointments with accountants, a folder of digital backups, a checklist of contingencies. It was an intimacy with responsibility that felt less like defensive posture and more like vocation. There were seasons of reflection, evenings when she sat by the window and watched strangers pass like a steady procession. Sometimes the grief came in small flashes: the image of the man who'd kissed her brow, the memory of a shared laugh at something that now felt distant. Grief did not ask for drama. It sat politely at the edge of things, sometimes swelling into a wave. She let it. There was freedom in permission. When Mark tried to reach out once, his voicemail was the compressed apology of a man unused to asking for anything. Caroline listened in the kitchen and deleted the message without reply. The gesture was tiny and absolute. She did not need closure from him. The courtroom had supplied the fact, but her life's closure came from the quiet decisions she kept making for herself. At a small reading 2 months later, a woman stood in the back and told Caroline she'd read one of her essays and felt less alone. The sentence wrapped itself around Caroline like a benediction. Protection, it turned out, had an audience. She thought of the readers whose trust she'd protected, of Anna and Rachel, of the forensic analyst who had mapped lines invisible to most. The victory was communal in a way she had not predicted. The city continued to be a metropolis of compromises. Caroline learned to leave room in her life for tenderness that required equal parts bravery and prudence. She taught workshops on contracts and on the practicalities of creative life, not as a sermon, but as a service. The lectures felt like a way to convert hard lessons into instruments others might use before they needed them. Her final thought in the quiet of that winter night was spare. Power granted can be returned. Power assumed must be accounted for. She closed the notebook and slid it into the desk, not as Dawn's grand finale, but as a small, steady act of custody. The storm had passed, and the aftermath, this long, quiet sorting, was where she would do her true work. Not in reclaiming what had been stolen, but in building a life so carefully that theft would find no purchase. If anyone asked for a moral, she would say softly, "Keep your name, keep your papers, keep your voice." And when the world tries to rewrite you, tell your own story first.